6 human species, gone, all of them, within a window of time so narrow that on the scale of Earth's history it barely registers. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo erectus, Homo naledi, Homo luzonensis, and we were there for every single disappearance. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what that pattern means, and why the answer is more uncomfortable than anyone wants to admit. I'm a peeker. I collect the fragments other people walk past, the shiny, the overlooked, the things buried so deep most people never think to dig. And what I found at the bottom of this particular hole genuinely unsettled me. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes, so let's get into it. Here's the story most people carry in their heads about how we got here. Early humans were primitive, brutish. Over hundreds of thousands of years, we slowly got smarter, a clean upward climb from knuckle-dragging ape to modern person. You've seen the image, the March of Progress, drawn by Rudolf Zallinger in 1965. A neat row of figures, hunched, then slightly less hunched, then standing tall, left to right, simple, satisfying. It is completely wrong. Anthropologists have been dismantling that graphic for decades, and for good reason. It implies evolution had a destination, that every other species was just a rough draft. The actual story looks like a bush. Tangled, branching, alive. Multiple fully realized human species exist at the same time, in overlapping territories, occasionally meeting, occasionally interbreeding, and then, one by one, disappearing. The real question isn't how we got smarter, it's what happened to everyone else. Today, there are 12 species of true foxes living on Earth, from the tiny fennec fox of the Sahara to the snow-white Arctic fox of the polar north. Though they all belong to the same genus, Vulpes, each species has evolved its own remarkable adaptations to survive in a very different world. In a very similar fashion, for most of human prehistory, there wasn't just one kind of human on this planet, there were several. Neanderthals were making cave art in Europe, while early Homo sapiens were still figuring out how to leave Africa. A 3-foot-tall human species was hunting Komodo dragons in Indonesia. The Denisovans ranged from Siberia to Southeast Asia, surviving altitudes that should have been biologically impossible. And in South Africa, deep inside a cave so narrow only the smallest researchers could enter, a small-brained hominin was apparently burying its dead, hundreds of thousands of years before we thought that was possible. This was the world we were born into, not an empty stage, a crowded, complex, multi-species landscape. Then we showed up in force, and it all collapsed. The disappearance of every other human species doesn't line up with climate shifts or volcanic eruptions. It lines up with us. The science on why is more complicated than most people realize. It wasn't one thing, it was a cascade. Demographic pressure, disease, resource competition, and in documented cases, something darker still. We're focusing on the late Pleistocene, the final crowded chapter of the hominin story, specifically the species that overlapped with Homo sapiens. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo naledi. Because this science has moved fast, major discoveries as recently as 2024 and 2025, we're covering things that weren't in textbooks a year ago. The Denisovans finally have an official species name. A new human species was proposed last year. A 2025 genetic study rewrote everything we thought we knew about how small the Neanderthal population actually was. What we're covering is the extinction itself, the mechanisms, the evidence, the settled science, and the parts still genuinely debated. And we're going to end somewhere uncomfortable, because the honest answer to this title does not let us off the hook. Homo neanderthalensis, the most famous extinct human species on the planet, the one whose name became a synonym for stupidity, for brutishness, for everything we congratulate ourselves for no longer being. Almost everything you think you know about them is wrong. The caveman image has a precise origin. In 1908, a French paleontologist named Marcelin Boule reconstructed a Neanderthal skeleton for public display. Stooped, bent-kneed, barely upright. That reconstruction defined public perception for the better part of a century. His specimen was an elderly male with severe spinal arthritis. He documented this in his own notes. He knew the posture was pathological, not characteristic. He reconstructed it that way anyway. The reality, Neanderthals had brains the size of a pomelo, comparable to ours, slightly larger in some individuals. Stocky, robust, built for cold. Males averaged 5'5", not monsters, people. They made composite tools, stone flakes hafted onto wooden handles with natural adhesives, requiring multi-step planning. They made jewelry. They made cave art. In Spain, Neanderthal art has been dated to at least 65,000 years ago, 20,000 years before modern humans arrived in Europe. They practiced medicine. In Shanidar Cave in Iraq, an individual survived for years with a withered arm, blindness in one eye, and multiple healed fractures. He could not have survived alone. His group kept him alive. In El Cidrón Cave in Spain, dental calculus contained penicillium mold and poplar bark, which carries salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin. These are not the behaviors of a creature that deserve to disappear. A landmark 2025 genetic study used an AI-powered tool called IBD-Mix to examine genomes of 2,000 living humans, alongside Neanderthal samples. Previous population estimates had been inflated by modern human DNA that had entered the Neanderthal gene pool through early interbreeding, being misread as native diversity. Once corrected, the true Neanderthal breeding population collapsed. Not 3,400 individuals, approximately 2,400. The entire global breeding population of Homo neanderthalensis, at the moment modern humans arrived in force, was smaller than a mid-sized college campus, running directly into modern human groups that outnumbered them locally by at least 10 to 1. The Neanderthals didn't lose a war, they were a sandcastle at low tide. Everyone knows about Lucy. Not everyone knows about Denny. Denny is a 13-year-old girl. She lived 90,000 years ago in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. The fossil we have of her is a single bone fragment so small you could hold it between two fingers. That fragment changed everything we knew about the human family tree. Her mitochondrial DNA, passed down through the mother, came back Neanderthal. Her nuclear DNA split almost perfectly down the middle. Half Neanderthal, half Denisovan. Her mother was a Neanderthal, her father was a Denisovan. She is the only confirmed first-generation hybrid of two separate human species ever found. The Denisovans themselves were, for over a decade, the most mysterious members of the human family. No skull, no skeleton. Everything we knew came from 3 teeth, 1 pinky finger bone, a jaw fragment, and a few skull pieces, most of it from one cave in Siberia. They existed in taxonomic limbo. Scientists couldn't even formally name them. That changed in June 2025. Researchers extracted mitochondrial DNA and 95 endogenous proteins from the dental calculus of the Harbin cranium, a massive skull from northern China, previously called Dragon Man. The sequences fell squarely within the Denisovan range. Dragon Man was a Denisovan. Homo longi is now the official species name. Their reach was extraordinary. Tibetans carry a Denisovan gene variant, the EPAS1 allele, that allows normal function at altitudes that would incapacitate most humans. Without it, the settlement of the Tibetan plateau would likely have been impossible. Indigenous Australians and Melanesians carry up to 5% Denisovan DNA, the highest concentration of archaic hominin DNA found in any living population. The Denisovans weren't a relic population in one cave. They were a geographically dominant species, spread across half the planet, and then they vanished. But there's one more layer. Approximately 4% of the Denisovan genome doesn't match any known human lineage. It comes from a ghost, a super-archaic population that diverged over 1 million years ago, so ancient we have never found a confirmed fossil of them. Dental proteome analyses from May 2026 confirmed that Chinese Homo erectus populations interbred directly with Denisovans, passing down specific protein variants still detectable today. The Denisovans were a living archive. When they disappeared, they took that archive with them, except for the fragments they passed on to us. We carry those fragments right now. Homo floresiensis, nicknamed the Hobbit, first discovered in 2003 in Liangbua Cave on the Indonesian island of Flores. 3 to 3.5 feet tall. The first specimen was assumed to be a child. It was a fully grown adult. Brain case, 380 to 420 cubic centimeters. Chimpanzee-sized. Every other hominin alive at the same time had brains 2 to 3 times larger. Wildly unusual for 50,000 years ago. How? Insular dwarfism. Flores has always been an island, no land bridge. Whatever hominin got there, most likely Homo erectus, arrived by water. Debris. A primitive raft. Once isolated with limited resources, evolution applies brutal pressure. The bigger the body, the more calories it needs. Individuals born slightly smaller survive longer, reproduce more. Generation by generation, the species shrinks. This happened to the elephants on Flores too. The pygmy stegodon stood roughly 4 feet tall, a fully grown elephant compressed into something you could almost mistake for a large dog. And somehow, in a brain case the size of a grapefruit, Homo floresiensis made stone tools, coordinated hunts, and survived on an island that was by any measure unhinged. Did I mention they hunted Komodo dragons, the largest living lizard on Earth, venomous, fast, capable of killing a water buffalo? The hobbits hunted them, along with giant rats, bats, and the pygmy stegodon. They endured on that island for up to 190,000 years, through climate shifts and volcanic eruptions, through every pressure the late Pleistocene threw at them. Then modern humans arrived in Southeast Asia, and they were gone. One last detail. The people of Flores have a figure in their mythology. A small, hungry creature murmuring in its own language, stealing food, kidnapping children. They call it the Ebu Gogo, grandmother who eats anything. The mythology places these creatures as recently as the 18th century. We don't know what to do with that. On the night of September 13th, 2013, a caver named Steve Tucker squeezed through an 18-centimeter crack, roughly the width of a sheet of paper, deep inside the Rising Star cave system in South Africa. He'd been in this cave many times. Never noticed this crack. He pushed through, emerged into a dark chamber, and his headlamp landed on a bone. Then more bones, then half a skull. What followed became the largest single hominin fossil assemblage ever recovered in Africa. Over 1,550 specimens from at least 15 individuals, retrieved from a chamber nearly 100 yards from the entrance, accessible only through that crack. Only 48 people have ever been documented entering it. The species was named Homo naledi, star person. Brain volume, 465 to 610 cubic centimeters, a third of ours. Ape-like shoulders, curved fingers built for climbing. But modern wrists, precision grip, and feet are almost indistinguishable from ours. A mosaic, ancient and modern features in the same body, as if evolution couldn't commit. Early estimates placed them at 2 million years old. Then precise dating came back, between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. The same time as early Homo sapiens, the same time as Neanderthals, a small-brained, climbing-shouldered hominin, walking around in southern Africa while we were already here. And the evidence suggests they were deliberately placing their dead in that cave chamber, intentionally, repeatedly. A species with a brain the size of a grapefruit apparently practiced burial rituals hundreds of thousands of years before we thought that was cognitively possible. Homo naledi dismantled our most comfortable assumption that bigger brains equal more complex behavior. We still don't know what happened to them. Here is the question that should be bothering you by now. If Neanderthals were making medicine and cave art, if Denisovans were surviving at impossible altitudes across half the planet, if Homo floresiensis was hunting Komodo dragons with a grapefruit-sized brain, if Homo naledi was performing burial rituals 300,000 years ago, why did we spend a century telling ourselves they were all stupid? The answer is not ignorance. It is something more deliberate with a specific origin point. In 1908, Marcel Boule published his reconstruction of a Neanderthal from La Chapelle-aux-Saints. Stooped, subhuman, barely upright. His specimen was an elderly male with severe osteoarthritis, documented in his own notes. He knew. He reconstructed it that way anyway. That single reconstruction fed into the march of progress, into museum displays, into the shorthand that turned Neanderthal into an insult. More damaging, it shaped what questions scientists thought were worth asking. If you assume primitive brutes, you don't go looking for medicine, ritual, or compassion. You find what you expect. The penicillium mold in Neanderthal teeth went unexplained for years. The Shanidar individual, who couldn't have survived without sustained group care, was treated as an anatomical curiosity. The cave art predating modern humans in Europe was contested, not because the evidence was weak, but because the conclusion was inconvenient. This matters beyond science. The diminishment of archaic hominins was never purely academic. For a long time, the existence of supposedly lesser human species was used to build hierarchies among the ones still living. That argument required the primitive versions to be as primitive as possible. Boule's brutish Neanderthal was not just a scientific error, it was a useful one. The correction has been happening slowly, study by study, cave by cave, genome by genome. What it reveals is almost perfectly opposite to what we were handed. The other humans were not lesser versions of us. They were different versions of us, fully realized, behaviorally complex people who happened to be in the wrong place when we arrived. Somewhere in the Altai Mountains of Siberia, 90,000 years ago, a 13-year-old girl died. We don't know how. We don't know if anyone mourned her. What we know is that a fragment of her bone survived, the size of something you could lose between couch cushions, preserved in the cold dark for 90 millennia, until a laboratory sent back an answer nobody was prepared for. She was both of them. She was neither of them. Something that had never existed before and would never exist again. Her name is Denny. Scientists gave her that name because she deserved one. That is not a scientific statement. That is a human one. There was a Neanderthal man in Shanidar Cave who lost the use of his arm, lost sight in one eye, broke bones that healed badly, and kept living because the people around him would not let him die. He had a face, a name we will never know, people who looked at him when he was broken and chose to keep feeding him anyway. And somewhere in a South African cave so narrow you have to exhale to fit through the entrance, people with brains a third the size of yours were carrying their dead into the dark, not abandoning them, placing them, returning to the same chamber, repeatedly. If you could stand at the edge of the world 50,000 years ago and watch the last Neanderthal clan retreating into Gibraltar, you would not see monsters, you would see people. Stocky, pale, adapted to cold, with hands that could start a fire, make a tool, and hold a child. You would see the end of something that had lasted 200,000 years, and you would be standing on the side that won. This is an uncomfortable but certainly consistent pattern. Everywhere we went, things disappeared, quickly, correlating precisely with our arrival. Australia, 90% of the megafauna, gone within a narrow window of human arrival. The Americas, horses, mammoths, giant ground sloths, an entire hemisphere's large mammals, vanishing within millennia of the first human footsteps. Europe, woolly rhinos, cave lions, the Neanderthals themselves. We were an invasive apex predator arriving in ecosystems that had never encountered anything like us. A Neanderthal band that spent 200,000 years reading European megafauna had no framework for modern humans, who could coordinate longer hunts, maintain larger social networks, and carry diseases to which Neanderthals had zero immune exposure. Modern humans evolved in the high biodiversity tropics of sub-Saharan Africa. Hundreds of thousands of years of coevolution with a dense pathogen load produced immune systems that were, relative to our archaic cousins, extraordinarily robust. Neanderthals had been living in cold, low-pathogen Eurasian environments for 500,000 years. When we arrived carrying tropical pathogens to which we'd developed partial resistance, the effect on immunologically naive populations was significant. We were, in a real biological sense, walking biological weapons, not by intention, but by evolutionary history. And then there is the thing hardest to say. Physical fossil evidence published in April 2026 confirms Neanderthals practiced cannibalism, cut marks on bones, intentional defleshing, marrow extraction, at multiple sites, across multiple time periods. It does not define them. We have evidence of cannibalism in early Homo sapiens populations too. But some researchers propose it may have accelerated the spread of prion diseases through an already fragile population of 2,400 individuals, quietly catastrophic in ways that leave almost no trace. So here is the full picture. A species reduced to 2,400 breeding individuals, immunologically unprepared for our pathogens, outcompeted by groups 10 times their local size, gradually absorbed through interbreeding until their genetic identity dissolved, potentially destabilized by pressures we may never fully document. We did not declare war on the Neanderthals. We did not hunt the Denisovans. We just showed up, with our diseases, our demographics, our cognitive advantages, and the crowded, complex, multi-species world that had been millions of years in the making, collapsed around us like a wave breaking on sand, and we barely noticed. We are the last ones, not a figure of speech. A biological fact with no parallel in the animal kingdom. Every other species in the genus Homo is gone. We are the sole survivor of what was once a genuinely crowded family. For most of human history, we were not alone. Other minds were out there, navigating the same landscape, mourning their dead, passing knowledge forward. The world was not ours. It was shared. That world ended, and we were the reason, not through malice, through the same relentless momentum that would later build cities, write constitutions, and send probes to the edges of the solar system. We are extraordinarily good at filling space. Everything that cannot adapt to our presence tends, eventually, to disappear. But the Neanderthals are not entirely gone. If you have non-African ancestry, 1 to 4% of your genome traces back to people who made composite tools, cave art, and medicine in Ice Age Europe. The Denisovans live in the high-altitude resilience of Tibetan populations, in the immune systems of indigenous Australians, in protein variants that let modern humans cross mountains that should have been impassable. We absorbed them, in ways that cost them their existence as distinct peoples. But we carry them. Every person alive is, in some measurable sense, a living archive of the hominin world that came before us. The next time someone uses the word Neanderthal as an insult, remember the man in Shanidar Cave who kept living because his people would not abandon him. Remember Denny, 13 years old, the daughter of 2 species, who left behind a bone fragment smaller than your thumb. Remember the people on Flores, 3 feet tall, hunting Komodo dragons with stone tools and whatever courage a grapefruit-sized brain could generate. We were not inevitable. We were one branch among many, the branch that survived, for reasons complicated and not entirely flattering, into a world that used to be shared and is now entirely ours. Be curious about where you came from. These are your relatives. This is your family. Never stop ingesting as much education as you can in this lifetime. See you in my next video.